Thank you, everyone. So I have been loving the book. Thank you. And I got it was like maybe a couple of years ago, we were on the panel with Yoga Alliance on diversity, inclusion, and equity. That's right. First, we met each other, and I attended the conference. So I love these little ways that we get connected in this digital world that we're in now. So thank you. I want to just kind of lay a little bit of the guidelines, just today. You can raise your hand at any point, and if you don't know how all that works, and just kind of unmute, feel free to put anything in the chat or questions. And I have a series of questions that I've created for conversation, and Jivana doesn't know them. So I'm hoping he'll be very responsive to them. I know he will be, and then it'll be a little bit of a dialogue, and then feel free to interject when the specific topics are coming up. I really want this to be a little bit of a dialogue. So please, I invite that space for us all. So first, I just want to ask you, how are you?
I'm good. It's been a busy couple of weeks. My book came out about just 2 weeks ago, I think. I've lost track of time. And then I don't know if you saw that I'm on the cover of Yoga Journal, which was, something I knew was coming, but it just has been busy with that. I appreciate, I've gotten a lot of great feedback, and that's sweet. But it's a bit of an ego trip that I'm trying to not get caught up in. Just, let it go. But so it's just been a busy time, and mostly I'm excited to have the book out in the world and get to have these conversations, honestly, because these are things that I've been thinking about for many, many years. And I tried to write a book that, reflected where I'm at. And so I'm really excited to share that with your community and anywhere. So it's been fun having a lot of Instagram lives. So yeah, I'm feeling grateful.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think just because the most recent thing is this cover of Yoga Journal, and just celebrating them and them uplifting and really shining a lens of on accessibility, which they've been definitely trying to do a lot more. And I guess I'll just start with this idea of, and I think you bring it up in the book, that yoga is inherently accessible. And I wonder where you think we've lost our way.
Yeah, well, I would say my work has been through Accessible Yoga, which is the nonprofit I founded, and we offer, all kinds of programming. And that was my first book, Accessible Yoga, which is really about adapting most of the physical practices, mostly asana and then pranayama, meditation. And that's kind of what people think of when they think of accessible yoga. They think about adapting the physical practice. Of course, most people think yoga is a physical practice, but I think when you spend time practicing yoga and studying, you begin to realize that it's so much more. It's a spiritual practice, indigenous to South Asia. And I feel like to respect the tradition of yoga, we need to try to, as best we can, to practice the fullness of this really universal spiritual tradition. And to me, that's really what is accessible, is that the main teaching of yoga is that we all share the same spirit, right? That is our essence. We have that inside of us, our Purusha, our Atman. Those are the Sanskrit words for that essence that we all have. And to me, it's like, if we all have it already, then it's pretty accessible. We just need to find a way in. Oh, sorry, my dog's barking. I don't know if you can hear. But yeah, so to me, accessible yoga is about giving people tools and supporting the ability to turn our awareness within and connect to that place, which is challenging for many of us. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying that's what accessible yoga truly is to me. And it's not always just adapting a pose. It could be through study, through service, many different ways.
Yeah, thank you. Beautifully said. And in the book, I know the book is out, I don't know how many of you have it, but I did get a chance to read it, but I was really struck with all the different voices that you brought forth, and the voice of yourself as a human being, as a queer being, as a father, as a son, as a husband, as a activist, as a devotee to a guru, and then the loss of that, right? And then the earnest seeker, and then this kind of gentle gardener that was always in the background in every chapter. And so one, I want to say thank you for being generous and sharing all the parts, and that it's very authentic. And I'm just curious, like, who are you most comfortable with? Who are you at home when you're talking about kind of getting back?
Yeah, I think you're touching on the fact that I have multiple personalities, maybe. I mean, I do have many voices in my head. And yeah, I think I'm all those things, and more. I mean, I mean, aren't we all though? Like, I don't know, like, don't you feel like you have so many different facets to you? Like, you're probably a little different when you're with your parents, or when you're with your friends, or when you're at work. And I think, yeah, I mean, I just was trying to examine those different parts of my life in the context of yoga, because I think one thing I've referred to this book as for myself is like public journaling. I mean, writing a book is kind of like public journaling. It's an inward practice that I do. My background is actually in art, which is funny because I don't know if that piece really came out, but my background is in drawing and painting.
Mm,
And I don't talk about it that much, but
yeah.
recently it's been, writing has taken the place of that. I still draw a bit, but I find writing is a really great creative outlet. And also it's like a journaling practice where I get to reflect on my thoughts. And then I get to go back to them through editing, which is a really interesting process too. I learned so much about myself when editing.
Mm,
I try to be not too critical, but, reflect on what is it that I'm trying to say? What am I trying to express? And how could I say it more clearly?
mhm,
I think a big piece of me as a teacher, I've been teaching yoga for, I don't know, 27 years or something like that. And
mhm,
so I think that desire to share also just comes from
mhm,
that place of like being in the
mhm,
role of teacher, and noticing the techniques that work well when I'm teaching and
mhm,
the ones that don't. And I
mhm.
find that personal sharing works really well, but you have to find the balance, not overshare. Do you know what I mean? So
Right.
I worry about that a
Absolutely.
little, that I overshared. But yeah, but I think it's a
No,
great
it was.
question. It's a great question. I don't think I have a really good answer for you about which is the real one. I'd probably
Well,
beyond all that, right?
yeah,
Spirit. Yeah.
I love that because sometimes I find that we're trying to find this like Atman or the yogi voice, or we're like, we almost try to
Oh,
release all these layers of ourselves. And so I think that embracing of all of that is a part of it, this idea of revolution and the inner and the practice, that
yeah.
we don't have to let go or detach,
Yeah.
which, yeah, I appreciate.
It's a little complicated, but I would say it this way, that yoga philosophy is usually a dual philosophy, dualistic. Like, you have in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, you have the idea that there is Purusha, spirit, and Prakriti, nature. So the fact is, like, according to the sutras, we're trying to differentiate between what is spirit and what is nature. And Patanjali would consider the body mind as nature. And so the reason that he asks us to quiet the mind is because then we can see the spirit, experience the true self, he says, right? But the fact is, I think sometimes when we do that in yoga, we've kind of separated ourselves in an unhealthy way, where we either criticize the mind, or this is just maybe me personally, like when I am told to control my mind in meditation, I kind of go to a self-critical place. Like, I get
Mhm.
annoyed with myself. Oh, my mind's so busy, I can't meditate. Or I beat myself up about something. And I feel like there has to be a different path. And I think even though it's about separating, I really think it's also about kind of accepting and maybe not integrating those together, but like
Mhm.
creating a healthier relationship between those two separate parts of myself, which
Mhm.
is like reflective of what you asked earlier. Like there's a part of myself, the spiritual essence, that's like the observer watching everything. And then there's my body and my mind going through this
Doing life.
life, like, yeah, like endless chaos and
Yeah.
interesting and painful things and fun too. But it's like, I think that rather than identifying with one or the other, I'd like to have them more have a healthy relationship to each other,
Yeah,
which I would,
versus so separate.
yeah, and like experience that as like maybe the way I talk to myself, to like just talk to myself in a nicer way, um, if that makes sense. That's something,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's something I've been asking people to do a lot, is to reflect on the inner voice. You know,
Mhm.
what is your inner voice or voices, and then how do you respond to them?
Mm.
Right? I think that's yoga.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So the book, for those of you that don't know, it's divided into 3 parts. And the first part, Jivana, you end with a section on failure and grief, which I found it so I was like surprised. I was like, wow, that's an interesting way to end this section. And there's a beautiful poem by Kabir in there. And I just would love for you to reflect on that. And I'm wondering if this leans into like that, like, yes, processing, journaling is part of the book, but there's often something that like sparks the book.
Mm. Yeah.
And if that has anything to do with it.
Oh yeah. I mean, you mean if death had anything to do with the book? Yeah.
Failure and grief.
Oh yeah. Completely. Well, a few things happened. Like my mother died just over 4 years ago, and it was very traumatic for me. I mean, we were very close, and I really relied on her. And I think um, that's what really actually then triggered I basically had an anxiety attack that landed me in the hospital. And I tell the story in the book about how, I thought I was having a heart attack, and the doctor at the emergency room was like, you know, there's nothing wrong with you. We think this is an anxiety attack. And I laughed and I said, I can't be having an anxiety attack. I'm a yoga teacher, and I just thought, well, I've been spending so much time trying to regulate my nervous system and doing all these practices. How could I be having this intense anxiety? And I looking back now, even then, like 4 years later, I think part of it was, I might call it PTSD from my earlier years, because I was as a gay man during the AIDS epidemic, I was surrounded by death. I had most of my close friends died during that time, including my best friend who died in 1995. And I was an AIDS activist, and I became a yoga teacher to bring yoga to my community. But when my mom died, I think it kind of brought that back, and I think I hadn't really processed it. And so that felt like a failure. I felt like I was a failure as a yoga practitioner, failure as a teacher. I felt like all the things that I had been working towards and teaching about, that I couldn't even practice them. You know what I mean? It was like, and actually right after the anxiety attack, it was very hard for me to practice. I really couldn't do subtle practices. It was too intense for me to do pranayama in particular, or to do meditation. To be quiet was very hard. And it was like starting over. And so, and I talk about that a bit in the book. I think that's what inspired this book, was that I felt like I had to really take a new look at my practice and the way I was approaching myself. I don't think I was in a healthy place, honestly. And I think I had used yoga in a way to, I don't know what the word is, not like to be overly disciplined and controlling. And it didn't feel like an integrated support in my life. And so I had to rethink that and come back to the practices that really lifted me up and felt supportive. I had to be more I had to be more accessible. I mean, it's kind of ironic because I've been teaching accessible yoga for so long,
Yep.
but I had to practice what I preached in a way.
Yeah. Well, there are these moments of our life that, life happens for us, right? Not to us.
Yeah.
It just kind of shakes us up. And then we refine the gifts.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I
Yeah. I mean,
really,
I think that's a good way to say it, but it's so difficult when we're in it, and I think that's the thing. It's hindsight is 20/20, as they say. Like we can see clearly in the back, in the past.
yeah, exactly. But it was such a, the practice was like just laid out in such an accessible way. And then
Mm.
just this real acknowledgement of looking at our failures and acknowledging the grief. That is a huge catalyst for
Yeah.
movement in life.
Yeah, and that's what inspired me to write the book. Was I thought I needed to process all of my new thinking around my own practice and the teachings. I mean, honestly, most of the book is yoga philosophy, but in a way where I feel like it's more about, I don't know, trying to share some of my process of understanding the yoga teachings and how it's applicable in this moment now. So, a lot of what I talk about in the book is service and social justice, but what I mean by that is that I saw that one of the things I was challenged with in my practice is a sense of what is the goal? Trying to understand, like, why am I doing this? Is it just to regulate my nervous system, or am I trying to reach enlightenment? Like, what is that? And what does that look like? And so then my heart has always been in social justice and thinking of, and but when I say social justice, I simply mean like wanting everyone to have equal justice, equal rights. Like, I feel like that's just basic yoga to me, is like wanting there to be less suffering in the world, right? Like that is ahimsa, like the first teaching of yoga, right? Ahimsa, and that is not only non-harm, but not wanting there to be harm, right? Not wanting there to be suffering in the world. And I feel like I wanted to really address that, like, what is the relationship between these ancient practices and this moment right now? Because also there was Black Lives Matter was going on when I started writing, and I was so inspired by that, So exciting. Yeah.
And the young energy that was fueling it. It was like a new generation
Exactly.
carrying it.
Because I never let go of my, my kind of AIDS and queer activism that I was doing in the 90s, the 80s and 90s. And I think it shifted, my attention shifted to making yoga accessible. But then I thought, well, really, it's all connected, at least in my head,
Yeah,
There's a relationship there.
there is. And I underlined a lot of things in your book, but I'm gonna read something that I feel like this is, you're hitting on it. If you have the book, it's page 106, and it's reconciling self-care and service. And it says the tension, well, I don't know, do you have your book in front of you? Why don't you read it in your own voice?
Well, which part? I see that. How long?
The first paragraph, the tension between self-care and community.
Yeah, the tension between self-care and community care is one of the biggest challenges facing contemporary yoga. The fact that we have to be told to care for others is an interesting dilemma, not only within yoga communities, but in society in general. An example of this dilemma is the argument over wearing masks during COVID or using condoms to fight AIDS, both of which speak to the idea of self-sacrifice for the benefit of others. It reminds me of that quote, which was falsely attributed to Anthony Fauci, but was actually by the writer Lauren Morrill. I don't know how to explain to you why you should care about other people.
That really, I paused for a moment. And I'd love to just, like, if you want to, and this leans into also how you modernize samadhi. And then you shared that great poem by Hafez, but also this idea of integration. Like, and we look at we use the words absorption, like complete absorption, but this connection, like it's almost impossible. And I have to be careful because I speak about this in a very absolute way, but I feel it, that it's impossible when you feel integrated to not look around and look and feel.
Yeah. That reminds me of something that I actually didn't write in the book, but there was one of the moments I've had in my life where I think I was like touching toward, I don't know if it was samadhi, but like a deep meditation, was it was a group yoga class I was teaching with people with AIDS, and we'd been working together for a while, and we're all in meditation together, and I opened my eyes. Well, I think I opened my eyes. Honestly, I don't even know what it was, but I thought I opened my eyes, and I saw this like golden thread connecting each of us together. And what I thought in that moment was that we're all connected. Like that was my feeling of connection. And so like, to me, like deep meditation or deep whatever you call it, deep, I don't want to say samadhi because it feels like so, I don't think I've experienced samadhi exactly, but I would just say, as far as I've gone in that direction, is more about connection. And I think that's what you're saying. Yeah. When I feel most connected to others, when I feel that we're sharing that same heart, that's when I feel like I've gone deep in yoga. And then I think, why don't we really talk about that? I mean, it doesn't feel like that's part of the conversation around the goals of yoga. I don't see that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of our teachers here, and we live in a bubble, and a lot of practitioners. We live in a bubble at Beloved, and I'm grateful we do engage in these conversations a lot. And the reason is because what we're seeing in the greater yoga world is not that conversation. And so, yeah, it's an absolute call to show up more and to have the conversations more. And in this thing with service, I this invitation that it's not that we all have to serve those, like the top 10 marginalized people of America or whatever community we're all in, but to also just look into our own communities, and just like use this tool to cultivate that, to connect, and then to hopefully create a better world. And that was a big message that I got from your book, was that.
I mean, service is acting out of love. And I think we can do that first with ourselves. That's self-care. And then it's to our immediate family or the people closest to us. That's where service starts. It's not about volunteering at such and such a place. It's like, how are you treating your partner, your child, whatever. That's how I learned about service. I have, I'm a gay man, but my husband and I adopted 2 kids, and now they're 20 and 16. But I got to be a stay-at-home parent and care for them from when they were infants. And I'm telling you, like, parents know what service is. Like, it's nothing you can even describe. Like caring for a child, especially I think as when they're a baby and like completely relying on you, like where you can't, there's no exchange. Like, it's not like, in adult relationships, it's like, take care of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and it's like, I love you. And I love you too. But when it's like an infant, you just give, right? And they look at you and smile, and that's a gift. But, basically it's like, you just pour it out. And that really was a wake-up call for me, because I thought, I didn't know what service was before that. Like, I thought I was doing service. But usually the service I was doing has a little bit of ego in it, or like expectation of wanting something back. But with my kids, when they were babies, I just remember this, like the kind of bliss of it, actually, like the amazing feeling when I wasn't exhausted, but when I was able to be there present, it was just such a gift to be able to give in that way, and to care for them and love them. And that felt like yoga to me.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I could say one more thing though about enlightenment, which is just that I think there's in my mind, there's two, what do you call it? Like ideas that we have about what enlightenment is in the Western yoga. One is that somehow there's like an idealized physical form that maybe through yoga practice would become like a picture of perfect health or something, that there's some like perfect body, maybe, that there's like this weird health focus in yoga that is so physically based. Now, it's not that yoga might, I think, make you healthy. That's fine, maybe as a side benefit, but that's not what yoga is really for. Yoga is for spiritual awakening. And yet we have this idea that if you do like all these poses, you get really strong, really flexible, and I don't know what, stay young forever, maybe. But then there's this other, like, we have this idea of like, oh, well, spiritual enlightenment is going into a cave and meditating by yourself, you know, and like leaving the world. I just don't think either of those really portray the truth of yoga, in my experience, which is neither one of those things.
Yeah. And it's such an individual path.
Yeah.
And I think that's we're in kind of the really honoring one of the major teachings of Krishnamacharya, which is like, this is an individual path, and never lose sight of that. And so meet the person, and what that enlightenment looks like is so unique. But there is a marketing engine behind selling enlightenment and what it looks like, and when you're new to it, it's attractive. And then you gotta,
I think marketing is key there. And in a way, I think to market something, you have to make people think that they don't have it already, that they're lacking in some way. And I think that's where we go wrong, because yoga says that we have what we need already inside. And the teachings are just like a doorway or a path or directions back to ourself. So it's like, how do you sell something that people already have? You know, it's like you have to make them feel insecure. I feel like they don't. And I think sometimes we create what I would call like a spiritual inferiority complex, that like people think I'm not a spiritual person, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that's fine. But really, in the end, you are like your spirit, like whatever you want to call it, it's fine. But
yeah. Well, this is a good kind of segue to it's on page 114, and some of you may not know, Jivana, you spent a lot of time in this kind of ashramic world, you know, kind of a living ashram with Swami Sachitananda. And I wanted you to like just speak a little bit about that, because this idea of the teacher and the teachings, and basically you made a decision once the reports started to come out of during the Me Too awakening, and then there's this line that I just absolutely love, and it's just it's a subtitle, and it's just, spiritual power without service is simply power. You know, and yet you look at you think of, you know, Yogaville and all of that, and just such a drive of service. So such a tricky thing. So just a little like digestion, and especially as you've been in these conversations with people, how is it coming up? And
it's actually interesting that people aren't asking me about it. I'm surprised, because I thought this would be an issue that people would want to discuss, but maybe it's just too complicated, because I didn't really end with any real clear answer. Like, I'm just sharing my journey, and I wish I could. It was even messier than what you described. I mean, I actually found out about the abuse that you know happened when I got involved in the beginning, but I was told, when I asked about it, I was told it wasn't true, and I believed that. And it wasn't until later that the questions came up again, and I thought, wow, what was I in denial about? Like, this is unacceptable, you know. And I had to really shift away from him at that time and change my understanding of of him, and yet at the same time feel gratitude for all the teachings that he shared with me. And yeah, it's like, it's just, it's like torture. It's like being pulled in two directions.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that I've noticed during that process was how my ego and my ego mind was attached to him and to how people thought of him, and how I was like, and I think this happens a lot with people who are within kind of guru relationships or cult-like relationships, that they tend to identify with that leader or that organization and put a lot of energy into it. And it's very hard to change that identification or leave after investing so heavily in it. And I found most of my frustration was coming up with some people that had been around him that were protecting his image. Because he always said, like, don't confuse me with the teachings. Like, do not even see me. I'm a person, but these are the teachings. And so he was pretty clear about that. And yet the entire organization was built around him, with him as the guru and the head. And I get that now. I see that that's a bhakti yoga practice. But the bhakti yoga, I mean, that's like another story, like to have a devotional practice. But if you really listen to his teachings, I think he was pretty clear in trying to give people access to yoga. You know, and he did a good job with that.
Mhm.
He wrote a beautiful translation of the Yoga Sutras and of the Bhagavad Gita. And he, you know, I mean, he was very inspiring. I got to be with him a lot. And he even approved of my marriage to my husband in 1997, which was kind of amazing. Like way before gay marriage was a thing. He blessed us, which I thought was pretty remarkable at that time. So in a way, it's like he was kind to me personally. And he was always kind to me personally, but obviously not. Like there's this other side of him, you know, where he
Yeah,
was having relationships with women. I mean, that's what happened basically.
yeah. And we, I shared a little bit that we've gone through this story in our own way, beloved. And yet the story is not ending. Like, it's continuously coming up in the yoga world. And I feel like in your book, even just the light touch that you did of it, it just invites a processing. And I think that's part of the grief and failure of the practice, how you ended that section. Sometimes that's also around what's happening in our world, the yoga world with teachers.
Yeah, but I think that you know, death is also a beginning, and so that's actually how I start in the introduction. I talk about gardening, and I kind of infer a little bit of composting, and I think it came up in a conversation I had with Tracy Stanley the other day, and she used the word compost. I just think about dirt and how, you know, soil is made of dead plants, but I like the idea of composting and how like something new will grow. And I think the fall of all the gurus and the abuse is unacceptable, but the fact is, I think what's being revealed to us is that we don't need to approach the teachings exactly in that way, that there's maybe another way to hold the teachings that's more effective and safer. And I reflect, I think, in some part of the book around this idea of community, which is not a new idea. I didn't come up with this idea, right? Many teachers have said, like, the community is the guru. And I think that I just reflect on that again, that I think that could be true, but we have to do a slightly better job. I think you're doing that by having a Sangha like this. But it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy to keep that, that going. And humility. It takes humility, because our ego really wants to be lifted up all the time. You know, like being on the cover of Yoga Journal is just a test for me, I think, because, you know, what I've learned over these years is that that kind of power or privilege or position that's like a teacher who's lifted up is very dangerous. And I think it's a trap, you know, that you can fall into. And I fall into it all the time, you know. I think that's an answer for me. But happiness doesn't come from that. Happiness doesn't come from outside. And that's what yoga is there to teach us. So the more I buy into it, the more, the higher I let myself go, the further I'm going to fall, whether it's dramatic or not. It's not the path of yoga. The path of yoga is humility, realizing that I'm not going to get anything from outside. It's all inside of me. And whenever I look outside, I'm going to have some kind of pain and suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, that relationship with the ego is ongoing. Our life, as long as we're in this body, this is going to be the great, it's one of the why it's, probably listed as the top 2 kleshas.
Yes, exactly. The ego.
So a couple more questions, and I'd love to just hear all of your voices, and just questions or comments is perfect. So one is this, on page 117, you talk about your favorite form of service. And I just think it's refreshing for everybody to hear this.
Yes, I should I read that, or I can just tell you?
Yeah, you can read it or tell me whatever you want to do.
My favorite form of service is listening. When someone talks to me, I try to notice my mind's tendency to start coming up with answers before they're done, or to think of how what they're saying affects me. I practice service by listening to what they're saying and giving them my full attention. It's also a beautiful practice to try to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Next time you're having a disagreement with someone, try to pause and think about how they feel and why. Working with the mind in this way is a subtle and powerful way to practice service. And I thought, I didn't say it here, but somewhere it's like, by losing an argument is how you actually win. Did I say that somewhere else? It's like, yeah, but just listening, it's such a challenge. Our minds are so active and ready to go, like ready to defend ourselves, ready to defend a position, or ready to challenge something that feels off. And I think, to me, love in action is actually allowing someone else's experience to exist without the impressions of my mind. Yeah, I'm glad you like that.
Yeah, I really did. And it leans back into, you talked about Sutra 133, the 4 bhavanas, and you use the language that was shared with you about locks and keys. And so I think about which of those bhavanas is the one that's speaking to listening as service. And I don't know if you have an answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think compassion, for the unhappy is often what I go to. I think it's interesting because, Patanjali doesn't really teach a lot about how to relate to other people. I mean, he's mostly talking about an inner practice. So that's one of the few places he really relates to that. So I find it's compassion for others. And that's actually the subtitle of my book. I mean, compassion is kind of the theme here, that the bigger my heart, the more space there is for you to exist. It's like, if I'm open and connected to myself, then I can actually allow you to be without having to change you in my mind, or have you fit into my idea of what's right, for you, or how you should be, or control you in any way. Because I'm not looking to you to solve my problem. I'm not looking to you to take away my pain. I'm not looking to you to make me happy. And I think that's really the practice of yoga, is that, attachments that Patanjali talks about all the time, is one of the obstacles, again, one of the kleshas to our enlightenment is attachment, of basically attaching to things that will make us happy in the world, or aversion, wanting there to not be something, to change the reality that is there. And those are obstacles because they're just not true.
Yeah.
That's not where happiness comes from. It doesn't come from out there. I don't know if that's making sense. But...
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then let me lean on, so it's called Yoga Revolution, and you've got these words of building a practice of courage and compassion. And then there's this call to action that you have. And this is something that we're just like, we're devotees of this, I would say, it's this interoceptive cultivation. Like you really highlight the need to interoceptively cultivate as a way of awakening that inner revolution.
Yeah.
And then then you get into the yoga revolution. This perhaps this is that work helps us evolve the practice for the greater good. But just any thoughts around why interoception? What is it about this very kind of science lens?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not much of a scientist, but I would just say, to me, interoception is more of a yoga concept. It's just such a great word that reflects this like heightened sensitivity to our inner life. And I think it's aligned with what I was just saying, which is that yoga is constantly teaching us to turn back inside. It's like, I started talking about attachments and pain. I would say that pain comes when we reach outside to the world, into the world, to make us happy. So the challenge is, can we start to reach within? But that is really a skill. And that it's not simply like look within or turn within. I mean, that is what we cultivate through yoga. And I think interoception is a good word for that process. We could even call it maybe like pratyahara too, like withdrawal of the senses. But I think interoception is even better because I think it's actually then like reflecting on what's really going on in there. Like, how do I feel right now? What's my mind doing? How's my breath? How do I feel when I do this thing? And then like, that's what we get to do in asana. We get to explore challenging the body, and then noticing how I react. Well, how does my body feel here now? How does what's my breath doing? What's happening in my mind? Am I distracted? Am I trying to get out of this? And then further in pranayama meditation, same thing. It's like heightening this inner sensitivity that I think is really what an advanced practice looks like. And I say that because, again, we have this, I think, incorrect idea that an advanced yoga practice is someone who can do physically advanced asana. And I don't believe that's true. And I think an advanced yoga practice is someone who has increased sensitivity to their inner world.
Yes. Yeah. And you lead trainings, and we have a training right now that's 300 that is called advanced teacher training. And I often kind of think about, that's such a tricky way to gather someone in, but we interview everyone, and I'm always like, oh my gosh, if you're looking for doing complex asana, this isn't it. Because that idea of maturity is the ability to move into the inner landscape and know, what is that imprint? What's that line? What's that texture? And at least not give it a story always, but at least know how to hold it, and then how to approach it, and maybe how to back away from it. And
I love that idea, imprint and texture. I mean, part of what comes up for me when I think about this is around the fact that, we're all getting older. And I mean, it's like getting older isn't a bad thing or a failure. It means you haven't died. So it's like getting older, I mean, I'm 54 now, and I think I'm learning that my body's changing, and there's just different things that I need to do than I used to do. And, in my 20s, like there's poses I could do in my 20s that I don't even I'm not interested anymore, and it wouldn't be safe for me. And that's okay. And actually, as I get older, because like I was lucky, my grandmother taught me yoga when she was already probably in her 60s, and then she practiced. I watched her practice, through her 80s, and it was like I saw that she did less and less physical practice. And I mean, that doesn't mean she was less of an advanced yogi. If anything, she was wiser and more connected, and I really saw that in her.
Mhm.
You know, I think an older person isn't less of a yoga practitioner because they're doing chair yoga. You know what I mean? Like, it just
Mhm.
drives me a little bit
Yeah.
batty. I get frustrated by that idea
Yeah.
that like illness and death is a failure
Mhm. Mm.
or
Mm.
disability or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And throughout the book, there are these really thoughtful questions that just invite us to reflect on these ideas that you're bringing up, because sometimes we don't realize the imprints we all have
Yeah.
around what something should look like, or, you know, I think today I was like, God, everyone's doing handstand. This is exhausting. Like, what is going on? And you feel like, should I be doing handstand?
Yeah.
And then you know, and you realize like what's feeding that, what's happening there. And just the questions you invite are those questions to just look at all these aspects. So thank you for those little pauses
Good. Yeah,
for
I'm
that
glad you like them.
interceptive.
Well, because
Yeah,
I really feel like I hope the book is a conversation because I'm just sharing and then I'm thinking, okay, what do you think? You know, like, what do you?
and I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Well, I have a few more questions, but I'm going to leave it because I want to hear, you know, how you're all doing and any questions, any comments, anything. So let me open it up. I'm going to unpin myself, and then you can raise your hand or you can unmute. Go for it. Hi, Kurt.
I'll jump.
Oh, Kirk.
It's a pleasure, Jivana.
Yeah.
So I have a question. And this is actually to you, Jivana, and to you, Maryam. How would you both describe the health of Western yoga and its lineage? And I say this from this perspective. Like you, Jivana, my grandparents were disciples of Paramahansa Yogananda. I did not know this until my grandmother one time when I was 21 said, "Oh yeah, by the way, we practice yoga." And handed me the autobiography of a yogi,
Uh-huh.
which explained a lot of things to me about them. They were very quiet. They were farmer stock. And they just did their life without fanfare. And like you said, it was service. It was just the way, the heritage that I saw my grandparents do. And I also am a Californian. So knowing that you're in Santa Barbara, I'm there on the beach of La Jolla.
Okay.
And my yogi days began, of course, in the roots of California about 16, several decades ago. And I watched the California progression of yoga.
Yeah.
And some of my close friends were Iyengar teachers and master teachers.
Mhm.
But it always puzzled me, the California yoga, because it seemed so off track.
Mm.
I'm not trying to be judgmental, I'm trying to be observant. I come to the East, I come to Beloved, and I tell Maryam, you got it. How come I had to come East, where California is the city or the state of New Age? So with that in mind, how is the health of the lineage of yoga in the West? It's
So
to you both.
It's a good question. Go for it, Ivana.
the health of yoga in the West.
The lineage of yoga,
I mean,
or
the
the
lineage
very
of
roots,
yoga.
or the very purpose of yoga, which is, like you said, introspective, connection, being present,
Yeah.
fully
I mean,
engaged.
I think that's a good question. I think that you're right that a lot of the problems in yoga arose here in California, or, you know, there's a very body-oriented culture in Southern California. But you know, I also lived in practice in San Francisco for 20 years, and there's a lot of incredible yoga practitioners up there. Some of my teachers are still there and really inspiring people. So I think it's both. I think you can find, really heartfelt yoga practice in California, but I get what you're saying. And I think that we've seen an evolution in the last, I would say the last decade in particular, kind of things seem to be improving in my mind. I think that if you look at Yoga Journal, for example, I mean, I only agreed to be on the cover because I know I've been actually working with them a bit on the side, criticizing them because of the damage they had done. And they brought in a new editor a year ago. And they brought her in specifically to change their image because it was like no longer acceptable. They had done a lot of damage. I mean, and I don't think we can just blame Yoga Journal alone, but I think Yoga Journal was a really great example. If you look at 20, maybe 15 years of their covers of like thin white women doing very intense physical asana, I think that was a really kind of the quintessential problem that you're describing, I think, is like that image of yoga that was on Yoga Journal. But if you look at, since the new editor took over last January, I mean, it's really changing. And they're trying to catch up, actually. Yoga Journal is catching up with a yoga community that I think is really reflecting on who it is. And I think Western yoga has moved beyond just the studio model. I think COVID actually helped in a way to help more diverse voices get heard, because you don't have to get hired to teach at a local yoga studio. You can actually just put yourself out there online. And I also think like Black Lives Matter and more cultural awareness was happening. And so we're seeing just so much more attention to lifting voices of BIPOC teachers, Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer teachers. I think there's just so much more consciousness around that. And I'm so relieved. I mean, I feel like we've been talking about it for a long time, and there's been many voices out there talking about it, but I feel like there's really a shift happening. I have to say, I think that we're moving beyond that. So I think things are getting better, is what I have to say.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I look forward to it. Maryam?
Yeah.
I don't know if I read this in your book. I feel like I did, but there was a leaning into modern yoga becoming a non-lineage yoga.
Yeah.
I thought you wrote that.
Yes, I did talk about my friend Theo Wildcroft is a scholar in the UK, and she wrote a book called Post Lineage Yoga.
Right.
People were very upset by that title, but actually she's an academic, and she was studying what was happening in yoga festivals in the UK, where teachers would go to these festivals and practice with each other, and then they would share what they learned with their students. And she was kind of she did a very academic study of the way yoga practices were shared among this specific community that she was studying, almost like a sociological study or something. And she said post-lineage yoga was this idea that we were community-based peer learning instead of top-down guru model. I know personally, she's not saying she's anti-lineage. I mean, she's saying the lineage is still there, but that there's been a shift, and we're finding more grassroots ways of sharing these practices now.
Yeah. And I that's what I embrace. And I think there's this not to culturally misappropriate, and not to whitewash, and not to like take it and just make it whatever you want it to make. I mean, there's inherent teachings that are important to be honored, but it doesn't have to come through this precise lineage. Because with the online, I mean, people are like doing their own trainings just by signing up for courses. And when you look at the courses, the Yoga International or whatever platform, you're like, this is a deep dive, more than any training would do. And so I embrace that. And I don't want to open this particular avenue, but I also believe it reflects the spiritual journey that even the idea of a religious society, that this little bit of expansion around the rigidity of what holds this or that. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Kurt. Go ahead, Jivana.
I would just add that I think that's the point of my book too, is trying to address this question. And the title, Yoga Revolution, I'm not trying to revolutionize yoga. I'm saying yoga is a revolution, and that if we actually practice the fullness of it, it's revolutionary compared to Western capitalist culture. It's not about going out and getting what you need in the world. It's not that you're going to be happy through fame or beauty or whatever the things are that we're told we need in the West, but yoga teaches us the opposite approach. It's through the subtle introspective awareness and connection to the self that joy is found. That's what the teachings say over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always view it all as a theory, and I'm just testing the theory. And so far, I like it. It works after 20 some years.
Being on the path is being a social activist.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you.
What other comments and questions? Love to hear your voices. Go for it. Even if you want to just share a comment of anything that kind of resonated. Come on, don't be shy. Shall I call on you?
Well, I know that people haven't had a chance to read the book. It hasn't been out very long, so.
Yeah. Yeah, just from what we shared, go for it. Hi, Anna.
I have a question.
Hi.
Hi, Jivana. My name's Anna. I'm just curious about if you could offer a couple of fundamentals that you find resonate most with your accessible yoga, like 3 or 4 fundamentals in terms of classroom teaching for somebody who's new to that idea like me.
Are you asking me about like
Your accessible yoga training?
Yeah, the thing. Oh, and the training and like how
Yes.
things I share with yoga teachers to make
Yes.
their teaching accessible.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have a lot of ideas. I would say, and I do a whole training on it, so I speak for hours about it. I would say, okay, notice your language. Notice if you are speaking in a way that, or teaching in a way that creates a hierarchy, meaning that you are giving people the idea that one version of a pose is more advanced than another, and see if you can find language that would allow people to perceive that whatever version of a pose they're doing or any practice is equal to any other version, that it's their version, that's their practice. And I think that would be one of the biggest leaps we could take in teaching yoga, is to take away some of the competition. Although I sometimes think we confuse fun and competition. So I think it's fun, right? It's good to be yoga. I mean, to have fun in yoga and laugh or whatever, but there's a competition that occurs that worries me. And I think it's reflective of just the way our minds work and the way we're trained in the West to want to do the hardest thing. Like if I offered 3 versions of a pose, 90% of the people in a room will always try to do the hardest version. If I teach it in that way. But if I shift the awareness to say, well, actually, the hardest thing here is to go slowest, or to create the most subtle awareness. Like if I create that as a goal, it can shift that kind of competitive sense. I don't know if is that helpful?
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I could go on, but
Yeah.
see. Thanks for asking. And I do have a training if you're interested, coming up in
Yeah,
January.
I'm interested.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a workshop, I think it's January 13th.
Right.
Yeah.
There
So you can come and
you go. Right.
experience.
So I'll do a workshop. It's going to be like a bit of an introduction to the training.
Yeah. Great. What else is percolating out there? And Glenna, I'm going to just plug for a moment, because on Wednesday mornings we have this Contemplate Life with Yoga. It's just this kind of philosophy group, and we're doing a whole topic about prana, and Glenna's going to lead a little talk about social justice and prana. So, Glenna, any thoughts here?
Yeah, actually, I do. Because this is an area I'm a social worker, been doing social justice work, my whole career. Now I'm a yoga teacher, fairly newer yoga teacher, but I'm interested in kind of that intersection of yoga and social justice. But as I'm curious, do you actually bring concepts about social justice into your classes, or is it more how you live your life that you are incorporating social justice? So I'm because you know, how do you kind of meld the two? You know, so I'm curious what your thoughts are about that, and I have not yet gotten your book, so.
And I have a question for you about prana and social justice. I'm curious about that.
Well, we've been doing a series on prana over
Okay.
last 6 weeks or so. And part of what we were exploring at one point was kind of our prana bank account, so to speak, you know, and how you spend your prana, what choices we make in terms of where we're going to use our energy. And for me, this connects to right action, you know, the concept of right action and wrong action and inaction, and dharma. And so all of those are pieces that I've been exploring. That is what I'm going to be kind of bringing for us to have discussion about next Wednesday. So that's how it connects for me.
Yeah, no, that's what I was hoping you would say. I thought you might say that. I think that's such a beautiful image, because I love the idea that we have, like, I think it was my teacher's teacher, Swami Sachitananda, who says that really the only choice you have in life is where you put your prana, right? Like, where do you focus that energy that you have? And so I love that topic. And I guess to answer your question, I'd say it depends. You know, that I think sometimes in certain environments, I feel more welcome to speak on social justice when it's obviously a group that's interested in that topic, and it is aligned with what's happening in that space. Other times I might make it more philosophical so that people could approach it in a way that feels more like they're coming at it from yoga. You know, speaking about how we all share the same essence, right? That what's so beautiful about yoga philosophy is that it has this idea that we're all the same and yet we're all different. You know, that in our spirit, we're exactly the same, but in our nature, in our body mind, we have completely different lived experiences, and we can't even really know what someone else's experience is. And I think understanding that duality, that I'm the same as you and yet I respect your difference, is really the key to social justice for me. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I would just say it depends, I guess, on the environment. And I think my job is to make that connection for people, because I'm a yoga teacher. And so my job is to show people how the yoga teachings connect to their action in the world. And that personally, my work has been social justice as well, but that may not sit right with everyone. Not everyone feels that their role in the world is social justice, but there are other words for that. Like, you can act in a loving, kind way and be speaking up for social justice. You can speak up when there's suffering in the world, when you see harm being done, and that's social justice.
And I agree with what you're saying in terms of the philosophical aspect of it, because I think the yamas speak to it, particularly ahimsa. And you know, if you think of ahimsa as compassion, then you know, I think there are a lot of principles within the texts of yoga that are social justice oriented. It's the social justice lens, I think. So yeah, but thank you for that. You did answer. Thank you.
And I actually have to say one more thing, which is that not only, I mean, you're so right, but like to the point where there's actually a long tradition of that in yoga. And that people who say that yoga is not, well, I mean, I never say yoga is social justice. What I say is that social justice is a practice of yoga, right? It's a form that yoga can take because it's love in action. And that has been used in many social justice environments and many revolutions throughout history. You can look at Gandhi. I mean, Gandhi created he was leading a revolution that was really a group effort. And some people say that it wasn't just him, but it was a group effort of people who were engaging in yoga principles. He particularly used the first yamas of ahimsa and satya to overthrow the British colonial government in India through nonviolent revolution. It came out of his yoga practice. That's what he says, right? It came out of his devotion to those teachings. He came up with this idea of satyagraha, which is the force of truth, which he called love. He said truth and love is the same thing. And the love force is what he called his revolution, which literally did overthrow that government. And then those teachings were used by Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was a student of that idea and used nonviolent revolution through the civil rights movement and created incredible change here in the US and around the world. And then Nelson Mandela was inspired by them, and used that in his work in South Africa to end apartheid through nonviolent revolution. Just being an example, really, Nelson Mandela. I think you can find the threads of yoga in all the teachings that those people shared and their actions. And so I just get frustrated when people think of yoga as only an inner practice. It is an inner practice, but it also, because it's an inner practice, it changes the way you are in the world and how you then act based on that, right?
That's beautiful. Thank you. Couple more. Hi, Larry.
Hi, so first, so thank you very much. I enjoyed your teaching and I'm looking forward to reading your book. I was wondering because, many of us have seen ways that yoga has helped us and changed us and also helped the other people around us who do yoga with us. But do you know, have there been large-scale studies of how yoga practice changes people?
There have been some studies. And I think I'm a yoga therapist too, but I really kind of shifted away from that side because I worried a little bit about the ways that yoga was fitting into kind of the Western medical system. For a while, I worked in hospitals with Dean Ornish. I don't know if you know Dean Ornish, but he created a heart disease prevention program, and I had a chance to teach yoga for his program, and it was really interesting and educational to work in a hospital with a team and to see the ways they were doing that. At the same time, I worried a bit because I think they were sometimes taking just parts of yoga and kind of appropriating it without really offering the fullness of the practice. So I guess my answer is there are studies for sure. At the same time, I think some of those studies don't reflect the whole of yoga. And I would suggest looking at iayt.org, where they have, actually IAYT is the International Association of Yoga Therapists, and they have a website, I can't think of what it's called, but they have a website just with research only. Maryam probably knows what it is, right? And there's this research database you can go and look at in terms of the area that you're interested in looking at, yoga for blank. But yoga has been shown to help in so many ways. It's incredible, really incredible.
Well, I'll just share because there's a section you talk about emotions and this kind of, getting real and bypassing and, just in our recent Washington Post a couple of weeks ago, they shared this study and I think it's again another kind of study about yoga, but without using the words. This study of like when people stared at a tree and then a group of people stared at a building, and then the people that stared at a tree would most likely help someone who needed something.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I think there's research about yoga for anxiety. I know that I thought was really interesting, and yoga has been used for depression. So definitely for mental health, it's been really good, as well as physical issues. I mean, Dean Ornish's work is remarkable, and it was early on, using the yoga lifestyle to reverse heart disease, which is the #1 killer of men and women around the world. And he showed that by using yoga in like a whole lifestyle, and that's what I liked about his work. He was looking at community as well. So the other big piece of his work that people don't realize was that he'd have these support groups. So they'd have yoga classes and support groups, and they do exercise together, they eat together. And in the end, they found that it was the yoga and the support groups that were most helpful for people in reversing their heart disease. And I thought that was a really interesting, finding. And it makes me think of one other study that I talk about a lot recently that I find concerning. And so there was research on mindfulness and whether mindfulness makes people more or less self-centered. And I thought it was so interesting because in a way, mindfulness feels to me like sometimes is taught divorced from the full Buddhist tradition. Like sometimes it's just like this one piece that's being pulled out that's very potent and powerful. And what the research found was that people that were already self-centered became more self-centered when they did mindfulness practices. People that were not self-centered, that were basically service-oriented, became more of that. Which goes back to actually, Maryam, one of the things you mentioned about how, spiritual power without service is simply power. And I think that mindfulness study shows an example of that yoga practices build energy, like prana, as like Glenna was talking about. You can expand your prana and become more powerful. You can basically connect with a source of power within yourself through these practices. But whatever's in your mind is going to be exaggerated when you do that. And so that's why the ethical teachings are so important. That's why we need yamas and niyamas and all of it. We need to be held accountable because there's tremendous power there that's available to us. And as we've seen, tremendous harm that can come when it's misused.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this past week I talked about prana in the Upanishads and shared the story from the Chand Yoga about, the Prashna Upanishad, about 6 teachers come to this major teacher to ask the questions. And the teacher was like, I'm not going to answer any questions until we live together for a year and embody. There was very specific yamas and niyamas, but it was basically like, until we can get along, like we can create a place that has peace. Let's not ask the big questions.
That's awesome.
So
That's
brilliant. And and in your book, you have a whole kind of section of the yamas and niyamas, and that highlighting of the sutra that says like these are universal.
Yeah.
And then it's up to each of us to make it universal. That's
right. I mean, that's the one thing. I think Patanjali says that stronger than anything else in that whole book to me. Is like, these are teachings for all time and all places and all people. I mean, that's a lot. That's a powerful statement. And he's talking about that, like, ethics. He's talking about the importance of ethics because it can go so wrong, which unfortunately, I think it has.
We have plenty examples.
Yeah. But I like what you said, that story about we need to live in community, because that's why I go back to what we talked about earlier. If we could allow the Sangha, the community, to be the teacher or to hold the teachings, part of that is also holding each other accountable and not letting anyone kind of take over and be the most powerful one, but to keep everyone in check. I think that's one of the things that a community can do. And it sounds like that's what you were doing here, actually.
We're trying our very best to do that, but it's because of my own practice that I keep making inquiry and keep checking and being like, okay, maybe I need to let me have the community lead a little, beautiful.
That's beautiful.
Hey, anyone else? Thoughts, questions, comments? I think it's always nice for Jivana to hear how this has been received. We get to see each other and talk about it. Yeah, go for it, Carrie. Thank you.
Thank you for this conversation this evening. This has been really, really good. And I just will offer that what was shared just very early on in the conversation tonight, and what we have kind of heard throughout, is this yoga as connection. And that really resonates really strongly for me. And especially over the last couple of years, as I've kind of explored my own practice and how I would like to offer it. It very much starts, and how I like to offer is this practice within ourselves, but then how that connects and grows with those around us, I think is just so powerful. And so I just want to, I loved hearing this and yeah, being in conversation about this topic.
Thank you. I agree. One of the things I say in the book somewhere is I say, when I turn within, I find you there. And I really feel that way. I think that connection happens in relationship, like when we talk like this, but also in the silence of meditation and in deep practice. And I know that for me, like, well, teaching yoga for so many years, like that was the most intimate I got with people, was just being in a room with them in silence. Like I felt so close to them. You know, it's hard to describe that feeling. It just sounds weird, but yeah, I just feel like that connection is so powerful, and it's such an important lesson. And I do practice on my own, but it's not the same. You know, it's not the same as group practice. And you know, it's hard with COVID, because it's really nice to have, I think, physical connection, even just being in a room together, sitting in meditation together. I found my meditation would go much deeper when I was with a group. It's like we could bring each other along. Have you had that experience?
Absolutely. Oh, beautiful.
Is that what you mean,
Amazing.
Carrie? I was just curious if that's what Carrie was talking about. How you feel connected when you go inside?
So I agree with that. But I think what I was more getting at is that as we practice the teachings that we find, especially within the yamas and the niyamas, all of that work first starts within ourselves before we can kind of interact and engage with people and connect with people with those kind of, with that mindset. But then I think that is where the yoga can really be. And I think I have looked at other ways besides just physical asana to share the practice. And I have found in those moments of connection that are maybe fueled by the teachings of yoga, I have found that connection, virtual, in person, whether we are moving, breathing, sharing, whatever we might be doing together.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I think in a way, the way I've structured the book is I have 3 sections, and the first section I call Inner Revolution, and the second one is Outer Revolution, and then the third one is Yoga in Practice. And the idea is that, you know, we need to understand that yoga is internal and connect with ourselves and apply the teachings, like you're saying. And then the next part is then look at how it connects us to the world. And then I end with this like reflection on what it is to build your own practice. And I think that's the key, is like, you have to have some way to connect with yourself, like whatever tools that work for you. I mean, yoga has tons of different ways of connecting inward, so that then when you go back out again, you maybe don't cause as much harm, right? Maybe there's a harm reduction happening because you've turned within. And so I think sometimes of ahimsa that way, of like, first do no harm, like a doctor's oath, right? But the other image that comes to me is like the ocean, and I talk about this a lot, like how the waves break on the shore, which is like reaching out into the world, and then recede back into the ocean, connecting back with yourself. And then once again, breaking on the shore. Like, you know what I mean? It's like constant. Our lives are like, to me, it's like I go within and then I go out all the time. And I think that I find that if I can replenish myself or connect or restore, that helps me to be available when I'm going back into the world.
Okay. Heather, I see you turn on your camera. Did you want to say something?
Oh, it's been a long day and I was lying down. I didn't think it would look good lying down. It's very nice meeting you. It's very nice listening to you, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I guess I'm just sort of liking it to, I guess, how do I say this? I'm on a mission to bring, and I have been for a very long time, to bring yoga to the world of people with addictions and in the recovery movement. And because the path of yoga, I don't know if I'd be enjoying recovery as much as I do if I hadn't found this path. So I think that's a missing piece in the communities, but unfortunately there's a lot of fear there. And I, you know, and I feel like addiction is a social justice issue and problem, but there's a lot of fear, and a lot of what I have to do is educate. And I think this is the key, is I have to keep educating about yoga is not a workout, it's a work in. Yeah, you know, I have to, you know, talk about the, you know, I have to just try to bring it in such a way that it's not about being a pretzel. We can sit in a chair, we can do it anywhere, we can do it at the kitchen counter, you can do it in your car. I mean, it's a way of life. But I am very much about inclusive practices, and that's what I call it. And so a lot of the domains that I've gone into, like prison and in different places, it's all chair. We all use a chair. We begin in a chair, we end in the chair, and we all, you know, are together in this journey. So I like that idea that you're talking about, the hierarchy, and it's also about being trauma informed, and that's probably my greatest focus, is to create the safest space so that people can, you know, find their way back. And that was my journey. I didn't have a body. I didn't want to have a body. And you know, so my whole journey, my whole life for many years was to not have to not feel. I really worked hard on that. And I really prided myself on successfully doing that to the point of death. So, and now 20 years later, I'm, you know, sober, and I'm now here. And I am so glad that I found yoga to help me put my earth suit on, you know, bit by bit. And that was the beauty of it. Each toe, each finger, I was able to get into this and be here and not pop out. So, but anyway, I don't know what point I'm making. I'm just saying thank you so much. I think we're all here together trying to create the safest spaces and the inclusive spaces, you know, and whatever it takes.
I love that analogy of your earth suit, and I'm glad you are here.
Thank you.
That sounds great. It sounds like great work. I mean, to me, accessible yoga is trauma informed. Like, they're really the same thing. Yes. You know, to make yoga accessible is to do it in a way that feels like approachable and safe for people. So I love that reflection, and also I agree about recovery. I think the teachings speak to it really well, which is like understanding suffering and how to like have less suffering in life. You know, I think that's a huge part of yoga. And then probably, you know, about, like, you know, Nikki Myers and her work. Yeah.
I know Nick. I've taken trainings from her. I met Tommy Rosen. I went to Costa Rica, saw him.
Wow.
I know all of them, and everybody's branding their own way of doing it, right? And that's the biggest problem. That's the biggest issue that I have in the long run, because I finally realized, I'm just going to say this to you, a lot of us will teach what works for us, you know, and this is what I'm seeing, especially in the addictions community. You know, Kundalini yoga works for Tommy Rosen. I can't stand it. It's too much for me.
Right.
You know, Nikki Myers is power yoga, not me. You know, I need a gentle practice. So everybody does what they can do because it worked for them.
Yep.
Right. And that helped me not to get so angry with them. This is not all inclusive,
Yeah,
folks.
awesome. Well, then maybe you can create that inclusive recovery
That's what I'm working
yoga.
on.
Okay, well, I like that. I like
Yeah.
that. And I love chair yoga, by the way. That's almost all I teach. So I think that's awesome.
I
I think
love it.
chair yoga is the way to democratize yoga, to make it available to almost anyone. It's so powerful, and you can do so much in the chair. And I don't, we'll all be doing that. I'm going to come back for a workshop. So, I mean, whenever that was, in January, and share some chair yoga with you, and tips for also creating integrated classes where people are practicing on the mat and the chair at the same time. That's one of the things I really like to talk about and teach teachers to do, because I think that allows you to have students working anywhere they want and still create a community, right, of people at different levels. And that's really important to me.
Oh, thank you.
There's the workshop. Maryam put it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hey, Joelle, hi.
Hi, thank you. Jivana, thank you. I really appreciate your wisdom sharing with us. And I wanted to share with you, I've been a yoga therapist for a while, and I really love doing it. And I teach classes as well. And Kurt and I are getting our meditation certifications, are actually the first Yoga Alliance certified meditation teacher training. So that's just by way of background for what I'm about to say. I really loved your discussion about two things: listening, the art and wholeness and vitality of being able to fully listen, which in what I do in yoga is probably one of the most important things I do. I've developed some skill in seeing, but listening is the most important thing. And the other thing, two other things. One, this is the question. I could talk to you all night, but one, I've worked with people, you're talking to people who do yoga and practice yoga. This is not the audience that I'm about to tell you about. People who come to private yoga, which we have a wonderful program, they all think they can't do yoga. They all think they can't do it right. They all think they'll be embarrassed if they do it. They have every message that you can imagine. And I know you've been there, obviously. So listening in that context is really important, because meeting a student where they are, they may want one little element of yoga right now. That may be all they can digest. So listening is so important. It's not about my teaching them my yoga. It's about listening and inspiring them. This is me, inspiring them to find their yoga. And it may take a lifetime. It may take, who knows, element, krama by krama, piece by piece. So, and then I overlay on all of this humility, because when I'm working with students, and I'll get to my question, I always tell my students to go take other teachers. I am not the teacher of teachers. I can only share with you what's in my heart, my mind, my experience, my perspectives. And it's really important to have many teachers, because each voice is different. Each person listens in a different way and inspires in a different way. So my question, and that gets to service too, but what are your thoughts on how you inspire someone until they're with humility, inspiring someone to inspire themselves? And there are many ways, I try to do this in my classes and my work, but do you have any wisdom about that? Because I find that the sense of humility is sometimes not as prevalent as it might be, but it's really not about me. It's about the student and their own ability to inspire themselves in whatever that means to them.
Yeah.
but to believe.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to hear you think about that and talk
Yeah.
about that, if you would.
Sure. Thanks. That's a good question. I mean, I think it's a really important question because the idea here is that we're trying to give people tools to find what they're looking for inside of themselves rather than rely on us as an external, force. So oftentimes after I teach, we've all had it where students are like, oh, thank you so much. That was so great. But actually, as if I had done something for them, but really as a teacher, we're just a guide and we're helping people find themselves. So I think that is such an important consciousness that you have around that, that like, it's about inspiring them to do their work, not so much to look to us for the answers. And honestly, I would say I tell them, like, I actually teach that in different ways. Like, I'm not afraid to tell people, don't listen to me, listen to yourself. That's what we're here for. Shifting the understanding of what yoga is. I mean, as a yoga teacher, my job is to educate people as to what yoga is. And so part of what I have to do is tell them, yoga is about getting more connected, quieter, and more subtle. Yoga is not about doing an external thing at all. So I will think of ways to bring that into the class. Like, how can we, like I said earlier, how could you do this slower? How could you do this with more sensitivity? How could you do this movement and notice what is happening with your breath while you're doing it? That's the advanced practice, right? What energy is moving in your body right now or not? How are you feeling in this moment? What's your mind doing? Like those questions and that's where we talked about interception. That's to me what we're guiding them towards. And I think lifting them up. I use a lot of humor and I tried to find something positive to say to them and to take away this idea of being bad at yoga. I just think it's such a misunderstanding. When someone says I'm bad at yoga, I mean, sometimes I just have to let it slide and just hope they find something they enjoy, right? I can't always change someone's thinking, but I can educate them as to what we're actually trying to do. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. It's a good question.
My greatest teacher was, I worked for 3 years with a quadriplegic and a paraplegic. And that was my greatest experience in my yoga career, which has gone on for many years. And but there is a subtlety about this inspiration. There has to be that energy of inspiration so that they have the courage and the self-awareness. I teach freedom. My classes are about freedom.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't use that. I sometimes use that word. Free the body, free the mind, free yourself. Yeah. But how, I've tried to make this my study. This is my life study. How do I, with humility, inspire someone to inspire themselves? And yes, all the positive language, but I want you to give me the silver bullet, if you will.
Okay, one more thought. I just want to say, one more thought is to ask questions instead of giving answers.
Right.
And really challenge people, to if someone says to me something like, what should I be doing in this pose? What should I be feeling? I'm like, that's the point, right? That's the point. So what are you feeling? What's your mind doing right now? That's how you do yoga is. So I would just ask them, ask them. And also part of it also for me is like accepting where people are at too. Like I would just say that some people, because of trauma, I would say mostly, aren't ready or want to turn within, and that's fine too. And you know what, we'll just have a good time. We'll, do some stretching and that's great. Whether you come back or not, I don't really care. That's the other thing. I was really trying not to be attached to what their experience is and realize that like you said it earlier. I mean, everyone has their own journey. And so I don't think we can attach our success or failure as a teacher to the success of our students. But I would say that my goal is for the student to transcend me rather than to be reliant on me. And I think, unfortunately, capitalism makes it so I want students to come back to me so I can get paid. But really, my goal is for them to be, like you said, freedom, like for them to be free of me. Right, that would be ideal. I want them to cultivate a home practice as much as possible, to bring yoga into their lives in any way they can.
Well, Jivana, I'm going to share one more thing with you, and then I just be very grateful for your being here, and I can't wait for your workshop. What I have found that works the best, and it's not any magic thing, I believe in my students. I believe in them as human beings. I believe in them as having ultimate potential to explore and grow and be free, no matter if they're a quadriplegic, a paraplegic, they've had 2 hip replacements and they think they'll never be able to walk. I believe in them. And I have to say that I think that energetic connection is really meaningful. So I teach from my heart. And that's, so I give what I can.
Yeah.
And I believe in them. So I do think there's an energetic connection that's really important when we work with people. And it has to be clear and honest and humble.
I love that. And I think I probably should have thought of something like that. I think that's the perfect answer, is like to see the fullness of each person, regardless of what their body is doing at that moment. And that's yoga. I mean, to me, is also, like I said, to see that we share the same essence, and to realize not only the fullness of their humanity, but the fullness of their spirituality. I think to see their heart, and also accept whatever suffering they're going through too. You know, it's not, sometimes, like I said, it's not always about having an expectation for them, sometimes accepting where they are right now, you know. But yeah, you're doing amazing work, sounds like. So thank you. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you, Joel. Yeah, beautiful. Well, I want to respect time, and let's close out, and I'll send a follow-up email with some kind of ways of getting in touch, Jivana, and his website and practices and so forth.
Hello, how
Let
dinner?
you. And maybe we can unmute ourselves and send Jivana some just beautiful energy with our Jai through the Zoom space that we're sharing. So it's always good to hear that energy and to see each other if you're comfortable. Gratitude, Jivana, and thank you for being courageous.
Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And a big Jai.
Thank you.
Thank you.